navigating change that swirls around us all the time, and sometimes we can impact that. So when people think of career now, they think of purpose versus job. You have a microphone and a platform, and you can put your work out there. Why are you here? What is your work for? Who is it for? And what does success look like? Because everybody has an opportunity to lead. Everybody is a learner and can teach somebody else something. But working on questions more than answers. And I really do think it matters. I think questions matter far more than answers. It really comes down to your interactions with people one-on-one, because that's where change happens. Wherever you serve, you have an opportunity to make an impact.
Thank you for joining me in Season 2 of Hoda's Career Info, your career literacy program, a program where I seek to explore career answers and increase everyone's knowledge about the great work done by the career development community. How do I accomplish this? One interview at a time. I am your host, Hoda. I look forward to another season of career chats with inspirational guests and insightful feedback from you, the audience. Ready to meet this week's guest? My guest today is David Reynolds. David is the creator and host of the Lead, Learn, Change podcast and author of a book by the same title. He currently runs Point for the Impact Project at the Professional Association of Georgia Educators, PAGE. He is a former public school teacher and administrator. And finally, David prides himself on being a dad, a husband, and an amateur woodworker. I'm sure you'll find the information shared by David Reynolds enriching and inspirational.
It is my pleasure to have you, David Reynolds, on Hoda's Career Info today. David, you do not identify as a career professional, but I wanted to have you on my show knowing that because your work reflects leadership in the world of educators who directly influence, in my opinion, the career trajectory of the students they serve. And with that in mind, I'm going to challenge you with the career term career to define and as it relates to the work that you do.
Well, I'm going to stick with the actual word career as far as the career-related term. And I think it's because of the shifts that I see being made in recent years. Not only have I had multiple changes in official roles that I've held, and sometimes those positions have been created from an idea, something that didn't exist before, but I think that when people think of career now, they think of purpose versus job. I think it used to be something you had to do, and now for many people, it's something that you get to do, and hopefully it's something that you want to do, and you think about it in a larger benefit type of frame. So I think that just the whole term career, the old question of what do you do, might not be a great one. It might need to be, tell me about your career, or tell me about your life, or that sort of thing. So I just see it as purpose versus job, and credentials change. Gatekeepers are gone in many sectors. You have a microphone and a platform, and you can put your work out there just exactly like you're doing with all the different facets of your work. So the YouTube, the podcast, and newsletters, and that sort of thing.
That's a very good definition of it, and a good way to look at career. It's not a job anymore. That's a very good point. I like that. Um, I just to give the audience some background about you, do you mind sharing what drives you to do the work that you do and a little bit of your background that got you to it?
I think in response to the first question, now it is wanting to make a difference. I don't know if that's a function of age. I don't consider myself old at all. If I live to 120, I'm about middle age now, so that's how I tend to look at that. But I think it's interest and benefit. So if you can get excited about learning something new for yourself that you can then springboard from and create something that you had been wanting to do or had started and then stopped, or it's a new idea that you hadn't thought about before, and or if you can share something with another person and they get to then do something with it, that's really a good feeling. So that might sound a little pie in the sky and rose colored glasses and Pollyanna, but I think that really is, it goes back to the first question you asked me. It goes back to purpose. You know, why why are you here? You know, what is your work for? Who is it for? And what does success look like? And that's going to be a different form for everybody. As far as what got me to this point, for example, this microphone didn't exist in our house 3 years ago. I didn't really know what podcasting was. I think I had heard one podcast in my life, and I really wasn't sure exactly how that worked. And but podcasting became was an opportunity through an akimbo workshop, and it turned into the creation of the Lead, Learn, Change podcast. And I've had an opportunity to talk with lots of different people in various sectors like you're doing. You said at the beginning, I don't consider myself a career based, career centric specialist or expert, but I do have a career and everybody has an opinion about that. So the podcast has allowed me to talk to people in different sectors, whether they're educators or not, because everybody has an opportunity to lead. Everybody is a learner and can teach somebody else something, and we're all navigating change that swirls around us all the time, and sometimes we can impact that. So to me, all the background that led up to where I am now, when that was whether I was a classroom teacher teaching industrial arts, which is a very rare position now. It doesn't really exist as much as it used to, or whether it was writing grant applications at a district office position in a school district, or whether it was working in professional learning at the Professional Association for Georgia Educators, where I work now. All of it's kind of been a slow, steady march toward what I'm doing right now, whether it's a podcast or writing a book, and getting clearer and clearer and clearer about what I believe, what I think that should look like, but not giving everybody a told, but working on questions more than answers. And I really do think it matters. I think questions matter far more than answers. And I think when you coach people or lead people, that it doesn't mean you're pushing them, you're pulling them, or you're creating opportunities for people to see opportunity, and they can take advantage of that or not, or spin off in their own direction. So for me, what drives me to do this work is I just get a kick out of learning something new and trying something new and getting somewhat successful at it, perhaps, at least by some metric, and then sharing that with other people. I mean, you know this well from the contacts you have on LinkedIn and in other networks. People want to talk about what they know. They want to share their expertise. Most people are genuinely kind and generous and really appreciate it when you seek their advice and support and assistance, as long as you're not taking advantage of them. So that's what drives me. I think it's just the way you're supposed to conduct yourself, business, life overall. I don't really think you can separate those pillars or facets of your existence. I think you're supposed to be authentic in whatever role that you're in at the moment.
Thank you for sharing this background and the way you present it. It just makes career as part of the life, really not a separate entity on its own. It's really part of what we do every day, and it becomes us. I was going to ask you a bit later about the podcast, but we'll jump to that right away because you did bring it
Okay.
up, and we will get back to my other question later. So you talked about your podcast, Lead, Learn, Change. My question to you is, when did you start it, and what were your reasons for starting it?
Well, it was not exactly accidental, but I had been reading Seth Godin's blog posts for a number of years and a couple of his books, and then I saw an opportunity to participate in a podcasting workshop. It was called the Podcasting Fellowship back then. This was 2019, and I took it. I enrolled because I thought, well, that would be interesting. I'd like to know more about that. Like I told you before, I've listened to maybe one podcast, so I thought I'll see what that's all about. Well, I must have missed the fine print or something, but about 3 or 4 days in to that course, and it was really only, I think, 35 days of intense, quote unquote, instruction with multiple weeks thereafter to provide you an opportunity to complete your work. I realized about a week in, wait a minute, we're actually supposed to create a podcast, not just learn about it. But I'm supposed to do something here. People already have the name of their podcast. They've got guests lined up. These people know how to use a microphone. They understand WAV files and what Audacity open source software is. And they're having all these technical conversations about different features and different microphones and interfaces and all these types sorts of things. So it was a little bit overwhelming. So in the next week and a half or so, I might have gotten quote unquote behind, but I think it was really just out of sync a little bit. So everybody learns at different rates, but eventually a podcast was produced. I did not have one ready to launch at the end of the 35 days. It took about another 60 or 80 days, if I remember right. I'm not sure exactly. And it has not been a high production endeavor as far as the number of episodes that are being released, but the people I've interacted with, as mentioned earlier, have been fantastic conversations. I mean, I've gotten to speak with Vladimir Monk, who is a 4 concentration camp Holocaust survivor who met his wife at the first place where he was transported, and they were separated and then remarried after the Holocaust. He lost his family there at Auschwitz, and he has an incredible story. And Felicia Mayfield, who it was in um, the very same area where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. On that night, she was there in that city, and her memories of the skies turning orange with the fires of the burning that was taking place. And Dr. Hayward Cordy, who happens to be the president now of our organization's foundation, who grew up in a home with 19 people in it with no indoor plumbing for a number of years, and was born a chronic stutterer, and then just continued to overcome all those obstacles and is still in a extremely important position of leadership today, and has impacted literally hundreds of people's lives, and has multiple young men around the state who still refer to him as dad. He had such an influence on them, and still contact him. And there's many, many more people like that. Uh, I, the next podcast episode coming out is from John Beatty, who has climbed the highest summit on every continent, but his most proud accomplishment is that of a book that he's just completed. So we talked about that more than we talked about the mountain climbing. So the podcast has been uh, a mix of people, but all of them have had teachers that they can remember instantaneously when you ask them who is your favorite teacher and why, or were your favorite teachers. And those that are educators that I interview, because there are many of them, they speak really eloquently about the practice of teaching and their views on teaching and learning and what it means to have students engaged. And then you also pick up on the great things that are happening in schools that sort of dismisses the sometimes too popular mantra that schools are failing, because there's some fantastic people who are doing some incredible work and change lives individually every single day, over and over and over again, sometimes for decades. So the podcast was an attempt to grab nuggets of knowledge and bits of wisdom from people about leadership, learning, and change, whether they think about it in that way or not. I even interviewed my own parents. They're 87. I interviewed them last year. They were 86. And by the time we finished our conversation, I think they realized that they had indeed been teachers themselves, at least to the four of us, my three brothers and myself. And I think that's the only podcast episode any of my brothers ever listened to, but because they were mentioned in it. So they finally listened, and all of us learned something about our parents that we didn't even know before that conversation. And even in the book, I have a short chapter about a conversation I had with my dad about crossword puzzles, because it really did teach me 5 or 6 important lessons about how to look at life and how to make decisions and come back to a problem when you're stumped, and how everything doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the answers, etc. So all that just combined to into a podcast. I do host on mic episodes at times where it's just my opinion on something or reading something or an observation I've had, but all of it reinforces our organization's approach to teaching and learning, about the students being the most important people that you serve every day, and uh, how you can make a difference, where you are, and that teachers are leaders, and that students are uh, actually customers of the work you design for them, and you have a total choice and control over the quality of work that you design for the people that you interact with, and the quality of the relationships that you have. And that's what you focus on. So that might be a rambling response to the podcast, but it really encapsulates all of those concepts, one guest at a time.
Well, definitely the sharing of inspirational stories is great to have, because a lot of people are going through their own issues and circumstances and challenges. So it's nice to hear success stories like that. And I am happy to mention the influence that you mentioned, the influence of teachers, because that's what I was talking about at the beginning when I said they do influence the career trajectory of their students. And through your stories, you heard some of that as well.
Yeah,
So that sounds like
absolutely. Yeah,
uh,
my son is a physician, and that's not me dragging out the audio version of the home movies and making you sit through a scrapbook of his childhood. But Debbie and I, my wife and I, had encouraged him in high school. We think you might be a great doctor someday. If you want to do that, do whatever you want, of course. But he kind of blew that off. But then one teacher said to him, "I think you'd be a great doctor someday." And then he came home and told us that he thought he could be a great doctor someday. so, so sometimes it's just that initial nudge, and now he's in residency, actually living that out. So it really does make a difference. The things I do now with building furniture or things along that line, that was all taught to me by Mr. Thomas Glenn in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade at Fern Creek High School in Louisville, Kentucky. And those are skills that I have been using now for 4 decades and more. And I have a neighbor here who's an engineer, and he's learning woodworking, and I'm getting to teach some of the things that Mr. Glenn taught me. So it really never ends. It really is a legacy building, legacy leading, legacy living type of career when you're in the teaching and learning world.
absolutely a very important career, and that is not always appreciated for the what it does. And so I'm glad we're talking about it. David, you also wrote a book with the same title as the podcast. I'm going to repeat the title: Lead, Learn, Change. Can you please tell the audience a little bit about the book, and whether the podcast and the book are related, or if one influenced the creation of the other?
I guess I should just say yes and then go backwards. So yes, they are related. Obviously, because I selected the same title, there had to be a connection there. And I'm not saying obviously in the way that, well, of course they're related, because they wouldn't have to be at all, but they are. And I even used the same cover art for the generic podcast covers, and with non-guest specific covers, and the book cover. And the same concepts. So let me back up. When I started working on the book about 4 years ago, it was a project that grew out of the Impact Project, which is a initiative, an endeavor that I run point for at Page at the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. And it was an attempt to capture evidence of the difference that we were making, the influence that we were having. Did we think that we were doing good stuff? Sure. How much evidence did we have that confirmed it? Not much. Anecdotal stories, bits and pieces of evidence here and there. But it was obvious to me that there was a rich amount of evidence that would find us guilty of making a difference, as my colleague George Thompson says. So I started working on an effort to capture evidence that showed we were making a difference, or discover if we weren't, or find out what we were making the greatest difference in, or areas that might need to be shored up. Just figure it out, what's actually going on here. And as I was capturing that evidence along with Marta Walker, a colleague of mine, it became pretty evident that this could be captured in book form more than some sort of dry report that might not have a huge audience. Of course, the book may not sell 1 million copies either. I get that. But it was clear that there's plenty of evidence here that we are making a difference. And the bigger lesson was we're not necessarily special, although I think the organization is extremely special and the people that work there are outstanding. But what we're doing and what we're accomplishing and how we're approaching it can be done by other people. I don't mean to replicate it or duplicate it or take it to scale, but there are core concepts and themes that run through quality work that should be evident in successful organizations and endeavors that are trying to make a difference. So everything started coming together. So some of the chapters in the book are actually versions of host on mic episodes where maybe I told a story about something that happened, uh, like the rafting trip down the Ocoee River with my younger brother, or something else, something from Driver's Ed way back when. So I knew that a book just about the history of the organization might not have a great appeal. And as a completely unknown author, stories that I wrote might not have a great appeal. But the thought was perhaps making them connect with each other and blending them in a almost a back and forth format in the book could have an appeal and make a difference. And, maybe the stories would stick. So over time, with a start and a stop, the book was started, then it was stopped, podcasting started, and it was very clear when the book was restarted that there was a huge impact on how I was thinking about our work as an organization through the lens that I had developed in the podcasting fellowship. It was very different. The who's it for, what's it for, what does success look like? Those three questions just kept on being driven home. So there's quotations, reflections, reflective questions, and there are links to the podcast in there and that sort of thing. But it was released right before Thanksgiving, and Kindle was actually released yesterday. And it's just my first book, my first attempt at trying to say, hey, here are some ideas. Here's some ways to think about some things. This isn't a guidebook. This is how we do some things at work. Here's some personal thoughts that go along with that and parallel that. And I believe you're making a difference, whoever you are, wherever you are. And maybe you can find something that will help you ramp that up, or at least make you appreciate what you have done. That's one thing I've discovered. When you go to a school and you speak with an educator, and then you go back and see them years later, I saw a principal that I had spoken with about 3 or 4 years prior, and I reminded him of some things he had told me the first time I spoke with him. And because I took notes as soon as I left the visit, and he was blown away, not with the fact that I had kept the notes, but with what they had accomplished and what they had done in the last 3 or 4 years. And if I had not captured that evidence, like in this book or in writing somewhere, I wouldn't have been able to do all that from memory and parrot that back to him. So it provided an opportunity to say, you have made a huge difference. Look what you all have done. And he was appreciative of that, because people sometimes forget, you get lost in the weeds, what you're actually doing and the impact that you have. You don't get a chance to see sometimes what your impact is, but every now and then you do. There's a section in the book about a student I had named Polo. We actually spoke on the phone the other day. probably the only student that I've kept in touch with, but we were separated for decades, and then I wrote about him a couple of times in a couple of graduate school assignments, and he's never left my mind. And so I found him on LinkedIn, and we connected, and so I'll get a Christmas card or a Happy Father's Day message, and we talked a couple of weeks ago about the book and the fact that his name is in there and a little bit of his story, that sort of thing. So there's just a there is a connection. I think whether I done a podcast and a book or not, whatever you were talking to me about as far as previous roles, current roles, future plans, if it's good stuff, it's got to be connected. I just don't see how you can have a lot of siloed work going on without if you're actually making a difference.
Such a great message in the book. And congratulations on the
Oh, thanks.
release of the book. I know it took some time, so I'm happy it's out now. And I know it'll sell pretty good. It's an interesting topic that to many parents and non-parents as well. And with that, you did mention a little bit of the work of the Impact Project, but so I'm going to take you a little bit back to it and ask you to talk about it, because it's really what caught my attention on your profile on LinkedIn. And I'm like, I was curious what this Impact Project was all about. So do you mind describing it and how you are involved in it? And
Just sure.
I'm going to throw that a question as well in there. Do you think it's career related? What you guys are doing, what's happening within it?
Sure. For our organization overall, we really work hard at the teacher pipeline and supporting that. So definitely career related by focusing on early stage career teachers, for example, recruitment, retention of quality uh, educators. So if one of the things that we do, and there are a group of my colleagues that are just masterful at this, but we have MSRs, membership service representatives, and CSRs, college service representatives. And the CSR role is relatively new, and they work with people in the university system throughout the state, every university, college university that has any teacher preparation program, and also work with high school programs and career pathways. In Georgia, there are career pathways for different trajectories, whether that's communications, education, manufacturing, those sorts of things. But one of those pathways is career in education, teacher prep. And so we have students in colleges and students in high schools that our my colleagues at Page interact with on a regular basis. And one of the things that we do is we host FGE, Future Georgia Educator Days, on college campuses for high school students. And so students who are in high school who think they might want to pursue a career in education attend these events. And for many of them, it's the first time or one of the very few times that they've actually stepped foot on a college campus. So they get to have that experience. And the students who are in teacher preparation programs at the college level have an opportunity to interact with students who might be doing what they were doing in just a couple of years by coming to college and pursuing a career in education. And so they get to prepare and present in a real authentic venue with these high school students that are coming through. We've reached thousands and thousands of people with this face to face where they get to talk to, and then colleges and school districts sometimes will set up, colleges set up actually for like a college fair. They'll have a table. So there'll be a keynote speaker. There'll be breakout sessions about all sorts of facets of teaching and learning, just like you would have if you were at a career educator already and attended an educator conference. So they get a conference experience. It's a single day, but they get that experience, and it's just a great springboard, and that feeds into the teacher pipeline. So starting even in some schools, it's even middle schools, but starting in high school to reach out and have a Page representatives speak with you and talk with you about a career in education, and then have you have an opportunity to go to college and talk with people who are doing that now, and then people in college having an opportunity to um, interact with people from Page who are providing sessions on like teaching 411, for example. What's that first year of teaching really like, and how do you really prepare for your interviews when you go to interview for a teaching job. All of that sort of stuff feeds into an education career. And then we interact with people in all facets of education throughout the state, whether they are our RESA, Regional Educational Service Agency directors, who work with multiple school districts and provide all sorts of services, or leadership organizations like GALE, the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders, or GACTE, the Association for Colleges and Teachers of Education, and the deans of all those institutions. So there's a broad net cast across the state with Page's presence, and we are constantly working on the teacher pipeline and forming partnerships and relationships with people who are doing the same thing, because it really comes down to one-on-one. No matter what you do, no matter how you scale something or what program or initiative you you implement, or you follow up on, or you continue for a long time, or maybe you abandon it. No matter what you do, it really comes down to your interactions with people one-on-one, because that's where change happens. It's with an individual interaction with somebody. That's what our membership service reps do such a great job of, and all of our college service representatives and many, many educators that work in concert with us. So uh, when I had the opportunity to start working at Page in 2008, it was very, very quick that I realized there's a lot going on here. And I was only working in the professional learning area at the time. And I'd like to find out how much difference we're actually making, and what should we be abandoning, what should we be doing more of, less of, differently, at least in professional learning, to start off with. And from that point, it just grew, and different ideas were emerging, and different uh, possibilities started surfacing, and they've just continued to come together with ways to communicate what we're doing with people that we work with. So that's really what the Impact Project is. It's just an ongoing effort to capture and communicate what we're doing and help it inform our internal decision making.
This sounds like a great project for sure. And just to clarify, so you do reference it a little bit in your book. Did I get this right? Or,
Yes.
reference examples from it?
Yeah. So in the book, there are stories, and then there are sections that are titled Page Break. So you do turn the physical page, as on Microsoft Word, whatever it is, you insert a page break, but it's a gray bar. It says Page Break, and Page is uppercase because that's the organization's acronym. And then what that page break section does is it highlights how we actually live out the concept that was just emphasized in the preceding story or anecdote or observation. And every section doesn't have a page break, and every section doesn't have a story. So it's not a really neat, okay, you're going to turn the page, you're going to see story, page information, quotations. There's quite a bit of consistency throughout the book, but I didn't do a force fit. Some page breaks are 1 page long. Some page breaks are 8 pages long. Some stories are more page than something that's happened to me. Some stories are 1 page long, like the story of our son Jackson and I, when he talked to me about how man does not live by bread alone, and he had a different take on that than I had heard in the past. But it made an impression on me for a different reason. So that's in there, and there's probably not a page break section for that one. So, but there's a back and forth just as you move through. So someone could actually read the book and just flip through and read the stories. They'll see the pictures and they'll say, "Oh, there's a story here," or just read the pull quotes that are in the margins in some grayed out section, and those might work. Or just read quotations from other people, or look at the reflection questions, words to live by. Here's things that to think about in your own enterprise. It doesn't matter if it's a 501c3, if it's a faith-based organization, for-profit, commercial operation, some civic group or governmental entity. It doesn't really matter. Wherever you serve, you have an opportunity to make an impact on a person, and then on people, plural, just because of the way you do your work. And so I think that these concepts apply to everybody. So the book is primarily for educators, absolutely, because it highlights the value of teaching and learning, but it's not only for educators, which harkens back to your initial point about how teachers really have their hand on every single sector of of society and of commerce, because the overwhelming supermajority of people who are employed are graduates of the public school system.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they owe their teachers a lot with their successes, definitely for sure. And the book sounds creative in that it's unique in the way it's cut out. I think you're saying the different portions of it and the quotations and the photos. So I'm looking forward to reading it for sure. These
Thank
were
you.
all the questions I have for you today, David. Was there anything else that you wanted me to ask about, but I didn't, or something to wrap up the episode today?
I always take this opportunity when somebody asks that question to say, if whoever's listening to this or whoever reads the book, take a moment to take 5 minutes and find a former teacher or look up somebody who's helped you learn something that matters and write them a thank you note or call them on the phone or send them an email or a text. But thank somebody who's taught you something and consider what you could teach somebody else that if you did that would really make a huge difference in their lives.
This is great advice for sure. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Hoda. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining me and David Reynolds in this episode of Hoda's Career Info 2022. With support from his colleagues, David took on a project to understand the impact of their work on the students they serve. How do you test the impact of the work that you do? You can connect with David on LinkedIn. And don't forget to check out his podcast, Lead, Learn, Change. Please remember that you can listen to Hoda's Career Info since it's also dropped as a podcast. To let me know if you or anyone you know works in the career development field and is interested in an opportunity to talk about your work, you can send me a direct message on my website, rightcareerfit.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date on the latest episodes. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and follow me on social media. I am your host, Hoda, and until next time, stay curious and keep moving in productive ways.